All right. Mr. Brooks, Tobin Brooks is in the house. How you doing, buddy? Mark. How you doing, Mark? How you doing, buddy? I love it. International Conference, Media of the Minds. How cool is that? Michelle Goodman, Australia is well represented in the house. All right. Well, listen, it's that time. It's like 1 minute to. So, well, we'll get started with the conversation. And tonight, it's we're actually going to look at. Let me get a little bit into the whole some theoretical conversation. Open to some theoretical philosophical musings. Doesn't require you to drop LSD. There's nothing weird or wonderful you have to do. So there's no there's no bizarre esoteric component to this. I mean, you can if you want, but just shut the video up on your screen so you know when you're hallucinating, you can see you doing it. No, it's this is my 25th year in the health and wellness industry, and in the very beginning, of course, like any new career you get into, you're really excited about it, you're really passionate about it, and you have all these really, really obscure ideas that you're going to go out and actually just crush it. You're going to find the answers, and you're going to fix everybody's problems, and pretty soon you're really disenchanted, going, "Oh my God, there's a lot of stuff to wade through," and every person you meet seems to be wading through something completely different. So it's I don't know how many people I've worked with and spoken with over the years. I mean, tens of thousands of people, and I guess maybe as I got older, or maybe I just kept hearing the same conversation spoken in a little bit of a different context. I know Tony Robbins talks about, so it doesn't matter where he travels. He said the basic human need. And it doesn't matter what culture, what language, we really kind of beat to the same drum. We may paraphrase it a little bit differently. We may dress it up. We may call it something different. But fundamentally, we kind of suffer the same psychosis. And the psychosis we suffer is that we actually believe everything in our head is actually true. So that becomes a philosophical point to ponder. Where if you can't trust your own thoughts, then exactly what are you to do, right? So we're running around, and I know that the vast majority of it is, if I had the opportunity to transcribe everything that went through your mind in the last 7 days, you would not allow me to make it public. Every random bit of craziness that went, yeah, exactly. Joyce is shaking her head. No, every bit of random craziness that went through your head, that you would not allow the world to see it, to read it. You'd just be horrified. And how many, and you have to raise your hands, because again, I've had this conversation enough times. I know it to be true. So you can be silent. You can silently make a declaration to yourself. Like, how often have you had random thoughts go through your mind that actually horrify you? Like, you just can't believe, you're having soup with a friend, all of a sudden your brain's going, take that spoon and shove it in her eye. And oh my God, just keep eating the soup, keep eating the soup. And you have no idea where these random things come through. And, and quite often it's just our brain does some really bizarre, wild, wonderful things, and it pulls out information, it drops things in right in front of you just to check out what you think of it. It may not be relevant to anything in particular, but the cycling of thoughts in the brain is actually pretty fascinating. Now I'm going to read you something, and I may have to read it a couple times to you guys to get the gist of it. But there's two things that I read over the course of my 25 years. Two quotes actually that had more impact than anything else, and they really directed my way of thinking. One was actually from this book I bought for like $5 at a big book sale. Basic Physiology for the Health Sciences, right? So, this was about 25 years ago I bought this book. Most guys would be buying, motorcycle magazines or maybe Playboy. No, I'm buying, I don't want to see the outside of a girl. I want to know what's going on inside. So fascinated. But I read this one part that said something about when our nervous system is stimulated, when the outside of our body, our cutaneous sensors, when we feel something, when our nervous system is activated from the outside, it actually goes back into the nervous system, and it actually tries to find a reference point to aid in the formation of a thought process, to aid in the formation of an idea. So everything that was coming in, we're inundated by our senses, right? So we see things, we hear things, we feel things, we taste and we smell. All that raw information coming in is completely and 100% neutral. It has no intrinsic value. It's not good. It's not bad. It's not right or not. It's not wrong. It's just neutral. It's not until we actually take it in and we decipher it. Because when you look at light coming through, light goes through the world in a wave pattern until we take it inside of our eyes and transfer it into something that means something to us, right? You ever heard the expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Well, there's a reason why they say that, right? So something I hear, sound means something different to me than it means to you. What we like as far as smells, it means something different than it means to you. What we taste, right? So it's a really hugely subjective experience, and yet we all have this belief system that everything that we're experiencing has some accuracy to it. Right, that it actually has some accuracy to it. How many times over the course of your life, and this is the beautiful part about maturing, if that's what we're doing, that things that you've held on to that you believe to be true that you realize are just utter complete nonsense. Things that I remember Jack Canfield once saying this. He said, things I would have died for years ago, I absolutely no longer believe. I absolutely no longer believe. So when I looked at the nervous system, when it comes to exercise, and that was my actually fascination point, is, how does that work? What is the implication when I grab something, when my body's interacting with the environment? All my senses are doing is looking for my history to try to aid in the formation of a perception. My nervous system is taking the incoming information, all my senses, and it's relaying it against something I've already experienced to try to make sense of it. Right? So you with me? Does that make sense? Right? So that's all we do day in, day out. If you have had children, you played this game, it's a bunch of cards all face down, and there's duplicates of everything. 2 pineapples, 2 elephants, 2 bicycles, 2 basketballs, and your job is to do what? Flip it over and find the pair. So your brain takes incoming information and it's just matching stuff up. Something that you're hearing now matches what you heard before. Something you're smelling now matches to what you smelled before. Something that you're feeling now, texture-wise, kinesthetically, is being matched to something you felt before. And there was even a question saying that, if this cup is in my hand, am I actually really seeing the cup now, or is my brain simply giving me the memory of the cup inside my head? It's a philosophical conundrum, right? It's just a really interesting question. So the second thing I read, and we'll get on with the show here in a second, but this was actually probably one of the most poignant and most important things I ever actually read and took the time to try to understand. And this is by an author named Dr. David Hawkins, who wrote numerous books. The one that kept being pushed at me to read, and everybody kept saying, you need to read this, you need to read this. And the book is called Power versus Force. Now, I'll read it, then we'll decipher it together. It says where it says, we have not yet asked the right questions because we have not had an adequate gauge of our questions' relevance or accuracy. So man's dilemma now and always has been he misidentifies his own intellectual artifacts as reality. We misidentify what we think is true. We believe what we think is true.
Oh, I think so.
But these artificial suppositions, so these thought processes, are merely the products of an arbitrary point of perception. And here's the most important thing. The inadequacy of the answers we receive is a direct consequence on the limitations implicit in the viewpoints of the questioner. Slight errors in the formation of questions result in gross errors in the answers that follow. So basically what he's saying is that the challenge is that when you're posing a question, when you're asking something about life, you're asking something about possibility, you're asking something about circumstance, you're asking the question from an arbitrary point of perception. Where in your brain would that question arise? Where in your brain who in your brain asked that question? Is it possible that the 19-year-old version of you that still has a bug up their ass about something that happened at that point in time is posing the question for you. And it's actually not looking for an answer, it's looking for justification. It's looking for validation of your point of view. Possibly. It's kind of a scary thought. How many how many times have you asked a question to only find it's a self-validating question? You're not looking for an answer, you're just looking for validation of your point of view. And that's really what we do most of the time. Why do you think science went to double-blind studies? Right? They had to find a way to get away from the subjective point of view, because what we think inside of our head isn't necessarily accurate. It's only accurate, makes sense to us, and yet in every circumstances, everybody that you talk to, I mean, do we not go to war fighting over our arbitrary point of perception? So I was kind of fascinated when I through my practice, I would have clients that were, let's say, were medical professionals. So somebody's invested an enormous amount of money going to school, they got their doctorate, they're brilliant in their own right, and yet there's aspects of how they showed up in their life, the life day to day, that really didn't make any sense. And I couldn't understand why is it, and looking at my own circumstances as I was going through this continuously growth cycle, is that why is it that we can do extraordinary things in some part of our lives, and yet completely tank, just be a disaster over here? And I really couldn't figure that out. I mean, if you have some degree of success, shouldn't you be able to model that success straight across the line? I mean, you know, it's not about you having 9 PhDs in various aspects of your life, but it just never made sense why we would lean so heavily to one part of our life to completely decimate or walk away or leave other aspects of our life completely unfulfilled. And I kept trying to understand it, like, why is it? And yet when I sit down with somebody or I sit down with myself, we intuitively know the answers. If I put a gun to somebody's head, and I used to say this all the time in my clinic, I said, if I put a gun to your head and asked you, what is it that you know you should be doing to change a lot in your life? What is it you know you should be doing to alter the trajectory of your health? And most people have the answer, especially now in this day and age in the 21st century with Google. We have access to so much data, but but yet the problems persist. In fact, problems almost seem to be getting worse, not better. People are more confused, not more enlightened. People are more schizophrenic, especially when you look at the personal development world has really entered into the realm of the diet industry, the fitness industry, just one more serial behavior we can engage in that's not living up to the promise, not living up to the hype. So going through all these bits and pieces, I wondered that if we looked at how the nervous system reacted when we were exercising, the same issues that people were having with exercise and their inability to get what they wanted from their body, maybe it was the same thing. We were doing the same thing with their psychology. So has anybody ever had an injury at all, some sort of physical injury, right? So does the injury occur at the level of the body, or does it occur at the level of the mind? Yeah, a little bit of both, right? So if you, let's say I have a knee injury, and I discovered this when I was working with clients that actually had joint replacements. Because when you come in, you have a total knee replacement, there's no receptors in the joint. They've all been removed, right? So there's actually a blank spot of, there's a communication gap between the lower part of the leg and the upper part of the leg. So I was wondering, well, how do you offset that? Now, normally when people get a joint replacement, it's not to make them better. It's basically to make them quasi-functional. It's to get rid of the pain and make them functional. It's not to make them better, but my curiosity was, all right. My curiosity, I'm trying to read this stuff here as we go through. My curiosity was that if the injury is no longer there because we removed the arthritis, why is there still a limp? Why are all these things still going on? And I realized that we actually had to go inside and actually create what we call a neural map. We actually had to rebuild the neurology around movement to the affected limb. So what we saw quite frequently was the left knee issues, right? And we saw that the left knee became more of an issue, more so than the right knee, just in kind of a wear and tear scenario, because 75% of the population was right dominant. So the left knee became more of an issue. The left glute wasn't as strong and as active. So when we started training people, we looked at, well, training the actual knee isn't the issue, or to retrain the knee. We actually had to rebuild a brand new map. If the knee broke down over 10 years, the 10 years of cartilage breakdown inside that knee, was there any pain response? Absolutely. Do people try to take weight off? Are we taking weight off the affected limb? Absolutely, right? So there's an apprehension of pain. There's apprehension to put weight on that.
It's so pretty.
Apprehension is at the level of the mind, not the level of the joint. The joint is relaying information. The brain's making the decision. So we create a pattern of apprehension, and we create a pattern of offloading that joint. And so that done over a period of time. So we finally get the client in our facility. We had these years and years and years of apprehension, these years and years and years of altered behavior mechanically. And now we had to go back and try to clean that up the best way we can. So that became the fascination for the longest period of time. But the curiosity became, when we looked at that aspect, I began to wonder, if somebody has a trauma, a physical trauma, is it stored in a similar fashion to the way we would store emotional traumas? So when I was 4 years old, I was walking across a 2x4 across a drainage ditch, and I fell into the ditch. So I'm underwater, and of course, it never helps to yell underwater, because your mouth opens and you pull water into your lungs. So never a good policy. But I was 4. What did I know? So I obviously didn't drown. So I got dragged out. But many years later, I didn't really remember it until probably in my late 20s. And this apprehension around water kept coming back. But I could swim. I was athletic. There was no issues around my inability to swim, but there was an apprehension. And again, it was just the brain saying water, and then it's going to match that to an experience and come up with the emotional code or the context of how I believe I should feel about that event. So you hold my head under, if we go swimming, you hold my head underwater, I'll probably break your femur, right? Because I'm a 4-year-old child in the body of a 52-year-old male. And my brain was simply brain slipped back and went through the catalog saying, okay, this is the point in time, this is your water reference. So we're going to match that against your history, and we're going to give you the entire context of your experience at that time. But the challenge is, it's in the body of a 52-year-old male who can swim. So it's actually a little bit nuts, and it's actually quite overwhelming. I remember one author was saying that when we get these emotional floods, it actually hijacks the executive center of your brain, right? It hijacks your prefrontal cortex, so you get all the experience of being of a human being at whatever age, whatever maturity level that you're at when that experience first happened. Now, it's not like you're reliving it. It's just the brain says, well, here, we're just going to open up we're going to go on the shelf, we're going to grab a book, and was it that one? Or was it this one? And the brain's just matching it. Our ability to be mindful and to watch those experiences, which is really what the whole concept of being mindful is all about, is to be aware that you can experience some incredibly uncomfortable things inside your head and inside your body. Doesn't mean you have to believe it. And inherently, that's the challenge, because quite often we get swept away in it, and how many weeks, months, or years and decades will we get caught up in reliving memories as if they were constantly reoccurring, when it really had nothing to do with our current lot in life. I see in quite a few of the older countries, because they don't have stress leave, and because they don't have a lot of things that North Americans seem to be able to rely heavily on. And it's not a criticism, it's just an interesting aspect of human biology. If we were forced to be stronger, if we're in an environment that has no allowances for any sort of weakness, and the show must go on, and it's immediate, you'll find people in some more challenging circumstances where they must stand up, they must show up in life. They do. Right, and they tend to be a little bit more resilient. And again, North American culture, we've kind of personally developed ourselves reaped to death. So now our brain's spinning, and we don't know if we're coming or going. And I think we've actually confused ourselves more than to actually have given ourselves any real direction. So when you look at these, the way the brain stores information about physical trauma, it does this very similar thing when it stores information about emotional trauma. And what's the likelihood, again, actually having the experience of a 4-year-old or a 19-year-old? Would you ask your 16-year-old self advice on sexuality and dating in your current context of your life? I don't know. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. I'm not judging, but I'm asking. I mean, would you ask that part of your psychology? Would you talk to the 19-year-old inside your mind, because you had the experience of the 19-year-old? Would you ask them for advice about your mortgage, about financial security, where you should invest your money? Would you have that? Would you have that conversation? Would you take their advice? Would you take it seriously? Would you ask your 21-year-old self, who was perhaps still bar hopping at that time, about long-term relationships and about child rearing, and about retirement and about emotional security? But the thing is, even though we kind of laugh at it, we do it every moment, every waking moment. We're constantly asking questions inside of our head, and the problem is that we don't know who we're asking the questions to. We don't know where the questions are being posed to. So we're accepting the arbitrary answers that are coming in our consciousness as reality. Right? Does that make sense at all? Because we're throwing inside of our head. Inside of our head is your entire life experience, from the day you're born to this very moment in time. Everything that you felt, all your misgivings, all your successes, all your failures, all your fears, from all the various aspects of your life, they're housed inside your entire body, but showcased inside your brain. And when you pose a question internally, you're asking questions inside your head, you're throwing it out to the crowd and saying, who's got an answer? 1974 shows up and says, I have an opinion. I remember when I was doing in 1974, it's of no value to me today. I'm just saying. I know I was doing in the 80s. Well, I think I remember what was happening in the 80s. Zero value, right? It's just nostalgia. We kind of laugh about it, say, oh my God, we actually survived with all our brain cells intact. Thank God. But it's of no value. Yet when we perpetually ask, when we're perpetually asking questions of what to do in life, what to do with a lot in life, how should we move forward on our fitness, how should we move forward on our emotional relationships, and we're throwing it to the crowd without any way of gauging the relevance of the answers that are coming out. So for those of you that are new to the Factor 3 program, there's an acronym called SAM. And SAM simply means before we move, we need to stabilize the body. And we do that neurologically through a thought process. We think about what our stabilizers are. We invest time thinking about how the stabilizers feel. We spend time thinking the stabilizers into play before we start moving, right? Hopefully you're doing that, or you're starting to understand that process. Does it make a difference, yes or no, by getting your stabilizers to fire before you do anything? Absolutely. We found we had huge improvements in we were involved in rehabilitative work, massive influence in the quality of movement, because every movement was stabilized. Every movement was being projected to a stable base within the body. So from stability to actually making your movements happen after you've been stabilized. So every time we went through an exercise format, from whether it's lunging or bicep curls or squats or planks or whatever the case may be, the brain had a very particular sequence of events it went through. It stabilized everything. So there was no left or right. There's no up or down. There's no back or forth, right? There's just the middle of the body. There's just the core of the body. And your extremities basically are like the canes for a blind man, sampling the world around you and attributing them back to the core. Everything is a core exercise. Would you agree? Everything should be a core exercise. Would that make sense? So philosophically, where's your core? Philosophically, do you know specifically what you stand for? And I don't mean just in a very general sense, but specifically, what do you stand for? And unfortunately, we haven't taken the time, or it's been so convoluted or been so lightly kind of glossed over, that we haven't buried it down enough, and the brain doesn't understand what we're after. And it's all over the map. How many people have more than 5 personal development books in their house? Yeah. And so think about the first one you bought. If that was the only one you were ever allowed to have, and you actually followed it song and verse for everything that author had written in, everything they told you to do, would your life be different? If you did everything in the book, the author said, everything, and you studied, and it was dog-eared, and it was and a yellow highlighter, and pages are falling out, and there was food on it, and it was stained, and it was like the old family Bible, and you read this thing to death, and you found ways to take all that information and practice it and implement it and practice it and discover it and practice it. In fact, you built your whole life around that philosophy. Nobody does that. We're just on to the next book. And so I looked at old school Christianity. I lived in the Mediterranean for 4 years, and when I was in that environment, what I found was a really beautiful, calming space. Right, every time I go to these old world countries, I find it such a beautiful place to be. It's just they were Portuguese. They were old Portuguese Catholics. They had old Portuguese Catholic traditions. And it's not that I'm pro-Catholic, what have you, but there's a continuity that they have in these older countries that we simply don't seem to have here in mass in North America. North American culture seems very frantic, right? And again, a lot of wonderful people doing a lot of wonderful things, but there was no continuity. And so we had this beautiful freedom of choice, and that freedom of choice and freedom to have our own identity and to be our own person has really left a lot of people kind of crazy. Because it really, our freedom hasn't given us what we wanted, and now the world is scrambling to try to find some peace and security. So I need to bring something up here for you guys. Now, how do I do this here? Well, here we go. All right, let me get this up here for you. All right, so I'm going to scroll through this. So this is one of my favorite quotes. In the dim background of our mind, we know what we ought to be doing, but somehow we cannot start. Any moment we expect this spell to break, but it does continue pulse after pulse. And this is written in the 1800s, and this is a whole concept of learned helplessness. When I gave a talk in Las Vegas several years ago, and in around this quote, I suggested that, obviously we would never be unhappy. We'd never be unhappy in our life on any count if we didn't know better. And unhappiness generally happens when we know what we should be doing, we're just not doing it, and we don't know why. We're stuck in the contrast between knowing better and doing better, and that's where a lot of the unhappiness arises. It's just this whole thing about learned helplessness. When we look at the various aspects of life, and this is what we'll be getting into in the next couple of weeks, is looking at these kind of 7 main areas of our life, and really how we show up in each one. What is the foundational premise behind wellness? What is the foundational philosophy around relationships? What's the foundational philosophy around spirituality or career or contribution or family or finances? And with each one, the curious question is that is the foundational premise or the relationship between all of these, are they all based on a similar concept, or are they all different? And it's actually quite surprising. You'll find that they're actually quite different. Same brain, same mind, but the foundational premise around wellness for some people comes from when they were 12 years old. Relationships may come from when they're 21. Spirituality might go as far back as they can remember, being in church in Sunday school. And the conversations around what these things mean really span the decades of our whole existence. So what we're looking for is actually, this whole concept of self-leadership, meaning that the ability to self-direct. And we want to be able to self-direct us to move ourselves forward towards worthy and attainable goals. There's a culture in North America of a large section of people waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, waiting for the right answer, waiting for 12 doves and the sign of a cross to fly over their house. We're waiting for this huge epiphany, when really the answers already actually all exist. So the challenge is you got to ask yourself if you believe in magic or not. And I actually do, not in the hocus pocus version of magic, but magic is the ability to influence the course of events by using mysterious or supernatural forces. But the neurological forces, the magic is actually, it's pre-existing in who we are. We just we haven't taken the time to figure out how to influence it. And everywhere you look across, every bit of literature you'll read, it always talks about the ability to actually pose a question. Whatever we're looking for, we actually have the ability to get. The late Wayne Dyer said, "You see it when you believe it." And this is Charles Handel wrote the book called The Master Key System. This is the book, the movie The Secret was created off of. And so the world we see is a reflection of the world within, and the world within may be found infinite wisdom, infinite power, infinite supply of all that is necessary, waiting for unfoldment and development and expression. When we recognize these potentialities in the world within, they take form in the world without. It simply means that you look around your world, the world you see outside of you is just a reflection of what's happening internally. And of course, if you've never seen if you ever seen the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? If you haven't seen it, it's actually it's a great movie, because it goes through this huge conversation about the subjective experience of humans in the universe, and if there was nobody to witness reality, well, there wouldn't be any. The world needs our point of view. The world needs us as a reflection to actually make the universe real. So think about it. Your perception, your brain is processing, your nervous system is having to deal with 400 billion bits of data per second. Right? I mean, just think about how much information. When I'm sitting here around me, there's colors on the bookshelf, there's lights up here in front of me, there's a computer screen, there's the hum of the thermostat. I have all this information coming at me, and my brain is filtering out what I need to pay attention to, what I don't. Right? So the brain starts filtering all this stuff out for us. But the thing is, we only actually pull in about 2,000 bits of data per second, and we filter out everything else. Now that's a lot of reality still left on the table, right? I'm not going to do the math, but think about it: 600 billion bits of reality coming at you every second of the day, and we only have access to 2,000 bits, and we filter out all the rest. And it's the filtering part is the part that we should be curious about. So we think about this is how we process information. So we have an event, something that's coming at us, whether it's something we see, something we feel, something we hear, taste, touch, or smell. And then we have these filters. So again, we have 600 billion bits of data coming in, and then the perceptual filters of our mind, they delete information that they don't think is relevant. They generalize it, they distort it based on the brain's perception of the world. Yeah, and you've heard this before. 5 people standing at the corner, and they all view an accident. So the police officer comes by, and he takes a statement from all 5 different individuals. They all see exactly the same thing, but they all give 5 completely different statements. How is it possible that 5 people viewing exactly the same thing can see something completely different? Because it's this whole perceptual process. It's what's going on inside the brain, and what our brain, through our experiences over time, has decided what things mean. So what this ends up creating is something called a meta program, and this is your operating system. This is how you function in the world. So meta programs is built on memories, decisions over time, the language that we use, and we'll get into language here in a moment, values and beliefs, generating attitudes. So this becomes our internal representation. And this is far from reality. It's just our perception of reality, which creates our physical state, right? Tony Robbins, again, if you watch any of his stuff at all, he really talks about changing our state is really one of the most powerful things we can do, alter the way we feel and then change the way we function. So of course, this ends up becoming a part of our physiology, and of course, it drives our behavior. So everything that we experience is really quite subjective, which is a little bit of a problem. So we have all this data coming in, And then we have this internal representation, the brain's deleting it, distorting it, generalizing the information. And we're not actually given a very good, an accurate viewpoint of how we view the world. You know, men and women can look at the same thing. You know, men see something in one framework, women see it in a different point of view. Yet we're looking at the same thing. So our experiences can be broken down into this acronym, which simply stands for visual, auditory, kinesthetic. So V is visual, A is auditory, K is kinesthetic, O is olfactory or smell, G is gustatory, taste, and then AD is auditory digital. And these are auditory digital are the words we use, of course, to label our experiences. Now, here's the interesting thing. As our conversation goes forward, it's these three main ones plus the auditory digital. These are the ones that we're going to be talking the most about. It's how our brain stores information. And we'll get into a little bit of practice with this in a second. So as I was speaking in the very beginning here, I was talking about the perception of movement. And from that book I read 20-some years ago, stimulation of sensory receptors, stimulation of sensory receptors evokes a prior related experience into play to aid in the forming of perception. So if somebody's doing, if you look at it from an exercise point of view, if I ask someone to do a seated row, and the goal of a seated row is to work the muscles of your back, but how many people here walk around and can actively flex and fire off the latissimus dorsi, or even know what it is, right? Right? Most people can't flex their back, right? So if I grab a hold of a handle, right? I'm doing a seated row or a one-arm row. 90% of the time when I watch people, they use their forearms, because the muscles closest to the wrist are the forearms, are the ones that can do the job. The brain's going, I have no freaking idea. You said lats, you said back muscles, but that really means nothing, because my reference point is that use your forearms to move the weight, because I can. I have zero, almost no reference for actively, consciously recruiting those muscles in my back, so I won't. All right. So targeting muscles in the body is actually much harder than you think, because you actually have to think. It's not the matter of when most people come to exercise and say, and they hear this all the time, I don't want to think, I just want to go for a run. I don't want to think, I just want to do the class because I want to reduce my stress. I don't want to think, but the problem is the failure rate's 85% or higher. It's because we don't think. And we lack the current experience in our body to make our bodies different. So we have to start building brand new maps for movement. Right? So, and again, as I was saying, if I feel something in my hand, though the exercise is for my back, the brain will find the muscles closest to the point of stimulation to do the job. It doesn't care what I want. It's just simply going based on its historical reference. I don't have a lot of historical reference on my back muscles or actively contracting them, but I do understand using my forearm or maybe a bit of my shoulder. So we feel it and we view it, right? Watching somebody doing squats, it's like watching somebody skate. Looks pretty simple, right? You put these things on, you float around the ice. How hard can it be, right? You get on the ice and you almost smash your face on the ground because you can't stand up. And you go, well, it should be simple. You just left foot, right foot, and you push and you sweep, and it's beautiful. It's complicated, and it's a neurological experience that the visual part, our brain is trying to take what we see and what we feel, and it's trying to make sense of it based on our current history. So in comes Sam I Am. So we talked about exercise, of course, a stabilization, right? Knees soft, core tight, shoulders back and down, and became the sequence of events that we started creating, which actually end up increasing our success rate with clients by a huge margin. And when the brain starts seeing this pattern, it automatically recognized, okay, getting into an exercise component, the very first thing the brain started to do over time was automatically drop into a stable position. And then we had to get them to think, activate, which is to focus on or target the muscles that we want to train. And then, of course, the last part was actually getting into the actual movement of the exercise. Now we know we can increase the success by walking through this process, and we've seen it for over a decade. But also looking at the emotional, kind of the more philosophical part of our being, and the same idea as well. We want to be able to stabilize stabilize our existence, our decision making, by choosing powerful emotions or character strengths. And then from that vantage point only are we going to start thinking about the goals that we want to set, what we're after. And the movement forward, how you get to your goals actually is quite a bit different than what you first anticipated, because quite often we're asking the wrong person, right? We're asking the fox to guard the hen house. And when we start actually looking at our lives from a consistent philosophical paradigm, a consistent thought process, a consistent set of values, that they're underpinning of everything that we do, all of a sudden the schizophrenia in our life tends to move away. So we're going to play around with this, this whole VAK model. Now, I want you to do me a favor. Can you, since we all have a fairly good imagination, we're going to practice this here for a little bit. And I want you to think about in the last 10 years, is there anybody that you can bring to mind that if you saw them today, you'd like to strangle the living crap out of them? There wouldn't be anybody like that in your life? I mean, you know, it's okay. It's okay. You know, it's I have a Rolodex here. I keep it there so I don't have to think about it. I just flip through and I decide Monday I'm going to strangle this person, Tuesday that person. All right. So imagine them, right? So within the last 10 years, somebody you'd like to strangle, right? You got it? Okay. Now, when you remember them, how do you remember them? Yeah, just one? Yeah, there could be lots. So how do you remember that experience? Do you remember it visually? You see an image of them, you see an event, a conversation that was going on. Is it more something you hear voices? Is it predominantly a feeling? Is it more visual? Is it more auditory? Or is it more kinesthetic? Is it something you feel, something you hear, something you see? What is the dominant part of that experience when you remember? Okay, got it? Right. So if it's a feeling, locate the feeling in your body. Whereabouts in your body is that feeling being generated? Okay. Yeah, the gut, actually quite a bit. A few people in the chest. All right. Now, if it's a visual, is it color or black and white? Do you see the occurrence of that person? Is it color or black and white when you look at the image? So yeah. So remember, we're not getting into the story. We don't care what happened. You're simply the observer, right? So don't get into it and be all kind of cranky for the next 25 minutes. Right? That lousy so-and-so. Yeah, so color for quite a few people. Right? Now, if for the image people, is the image close to you or far away? Right? And again, remember, it's not about what happened. What happened is subjective. We don't even know if it's true. Not really, right? So it's not about trying to be right. We're just curious about, how do I think? How do I remember? How do I access information? Yeah, so what's quite interesting, this is fascinating, and we'll get to the feeling people in a moment. I'm not forgetting about you. The imaging stuff is more ways to play around with it. So invariably, everybody that had the image was actually really close in their head. Like they when they think about it, it's just it's a bit impressive, right? Because it's really quite close. Now, how many years has it been since that occurrence, since that happened? How long has it been since that actual occurrence with that individual took place? 35 years, 4 years, 20 years, last year. Well, now here's the interesting part, and I'll challenge you to challenge yourself with as we go through this process. Why is it still holding? Why is it actually taking up bandwidth inside your head? There's actually an energetic cost to holding that information because you're keeping it alive, right? We know that. It's just so we actually put energy and effort, and we allocate mental real estate, physical real estate to hold that to hold that memory. And the fact that it's still close means that it's still really unsettled, because if it's that close, it doesn't feel good, does it? No, it's oppressive. So do me a favor, for you visual people, can you push that thing about 50 feet away from you? Just shove it the freak away. Just push it away. Push it away in reference to how long ago it was. If it was a year away, push it, maybe 20 feet away. If it was 35 years away, punt it to the end of the field, all right, where it belongs. Right. So based on historical reference, move it away an appropriate distance away from you, based on the occurrence in history when it first occurred, where it belongs, truly. Right. Now, let me ask you: when you move at the appropriate distance that you believe away from you, is the kinesthetic reference to it the same? Does it feel the same? Does it feel better or feel worse? If it's better, give me a thumbs up. Yeah, generally. If something's up here, like somebody's screaming in your face, it's just not going to feel good. I can't imagine, unless you're a masochist, right? So quite often we look at experiences, and this is the mindful way to look at things. Rather than believing everything we think is true, the curiosity is, how do we, did you read that comment? Kind of hard to get rid of your mother-in-law. Yeah, well, actually, I'll give you some strategies. Before we're done, we'll actually deal with in-law strategies. Well, you guys will be like gold when you leave. Oh, it's so funny. So it's, so when we push information away, when we take what's occurring inside of our head and we move it further away, of course, it changes the reference and how we experience it. Anything that's really up here, up front and close, is very visceral. It's agitating all the time, and we compartmentalize it, but we don't actually get rid of it. And humans, we have this really interesting process. When we're caught up in a stress cycle, our brain compartmentalizes information. Right. So if you're, I'm working with a gentleman in Kentucky. He's an ex-Marine, and he works for the ATF. So he's the guy, the big ATF yellow thing on their jackets, are kicking indoors, right? Firearms and tobacco agency in the United States. So this guy's a badass, right? But working with law enforcement, what I discovered working in the military is that part of their training is to compartmentalize the thought process. If you're working as a medical professional, you're working in ER as a nurse or a doctor, you compartmentalize. You absolutely must. Well, in that career, because there's so much stuff coming at you, you don't have it. There isn't a place for a high degree of emotionality around your work, so you compartmentalize. The problem is that we're not designed to do that. We do it in stressful circumstances to take oppressive thought processes and kind of move it off to one side. But when our brain is compartmentalized and all our experiences are all over the place inside of our mind, it tends to create a bit of schizophrenia. And of course, depending on the experiences of our day, some days we feel like we're in flow. Some days we feel like we're crazy. We can't access our emotional intelligence when we want it. And certain circumstances access different parts of our psychology. So the idea being is that we want to move away from the stressed out, compartmentalized brain into a brain that actually has some synergy and some harmony to it, where all parts support the whole. Right? So getting back, so again, having said that, when we're looking at these pieces, what we're experimenting with is that we realize that the thoughts we think are just they're meanings that were created arbitrarily over time, and we didn't actually stand up for ourselves and decide on what they meant at the time that these occurrences were happening. We didn't have the opportunity. We made rash decisions. We made knee-jerk decisions on what was occurring. So, right, Sal, we'll tape it, and you'll get a copy of it here in a little bit. So the decision, the thought process going forward as we go through this process, what we're hoping to be able to do is make you mindful enough, having a set of values, a set of character strengths that you want to be able to utilize. So when things are showing up or things are coming in, you actually have something you can measure it against. I have a saying, and I'm not sure if it's a good one, but said, be a Catholic, be a Jew, but stand for something. Decide on a philosophical point of view. Pick a path. Don't be so schizophrenic. In North America, where it's all over the map. A bunch of really great people that are very quotable, but not very settled, right? How many people give great information to their friends but can't get their own shit together, right? Yeah, absolutely. And so, so why do you suppose that is? Wouldn't it? I kind of think it's our turn, right? I really think it's our turn, and it's not as complicated, I believe, as we make it out to be. If I want to make it, I make it complicated because I can sell a bunch of books, but I want to make it simple so that you don't have to continue to buy books and you do at your leisure, just for something fun to do, for maybe for more linguistic representation, but your philosophy is kind of fixed and on point. So it's so seeing the interesting thing that this individual that you thought about in the last 10 years or 25 years, they still have access to your emotional context. They still have access to your happiness because you still feel it. You feel the experience in real time when you bring it back. So I would suggest that's a bit of a problem. And how many of those experiences are you hanging on to? Well, it all depends how long you've been alive, right? I've been on the planet almost 53 years, so I've got lots of them. If you're on the planet longer, well, you got more of them, right? If you're on the planet less, then you don't have quite so many. And maybe we can actually stop the insanity before you get any older. So do me a favor, just push that person aside for a second, and I want you to use your imagination. Go to the most beautiful place in the world that either you've holidayed in or wish to holiday in. I just want your brain to go somewhere else just for a second. Anywhere else in the world. And the reason why I asked you to do that, and it's very simple, I needed to go to a visual creative part of your brain, because what I had you in visual recall. I had you recalling, right? So you're in the memory recall part of your consciousness. I want to go into more of a kind of an imagination process to actually leave that part of your brain, that hemisphere of your brain. So when you I want you to go through and think about the 3 top values that you declare you to own. If you say, I'm a good person, then how do you know? What are the 3 most dominant characteristics or values that you adhere to, that you believe that you run your life on? It could be generosity, it could be honesty, it could be empathy, it could be any number of those things. What are 3 things that you value the most? Values or character strengths that you subscribe to, that you believe that you carry in some measure, that would be worthwhile building an entire life on, right? So think about it. Just take a couple seconds and think about what that might be. Right, so 3 values or 3 character strengths that you believe you embody. In fact, there's probably evidence of those things showing up in your life that you could recall, that would be worthwhile building an entire life on. Okay, y'all got something? It's funny, if I ask people, say, give me 10 things you suck at and why you're a lousy human being, people, like 8 seconds, they've got like 13 things written down. But when you ask people to really think about something beautiful and powerful about themselves, it's a little bit more challenging. All right, loyalty, honesty, integrity. Now, with those character strengths, those values, and you might have 3, you might have 2, you might have 1, whatever you come up with, whatever showing up for you right now. Can you go back and can you find evidence of it in your history? Can you think of a time where you were that person? You displayed those characteristics. Imagine a time. When were you that person? And when you think about the experience, when you have an experience, the more, and perhaps the most dominant one that comes to mind, can you go through the whole process? Recall all of it. Recall the circumstances. Recall what was said. Recall how you felt in the experience. And then recall where you felt it inside your body. Where do you feel that experience? when you remember it, when when you're hearing what you said, when you're feeling what you felt, when you're seeing what you saw, how does it show up inside your body? Where does it show up and how does it feel? Okay. All right, good. And and chess actually it's a pretty dominant characteristic of those experiences. Now, can you do me a favor? Sit in that experience, and can you just do me a favor here for a second? Close your eyes just for a moment, and I want you to hang on to the experience a little bit, right? If you feel it in your chest, I want you to take a deep breath, and every inhalation is like air being blown on a fire, and we're actually going to kind of spur up the embers a little bit. So as you breathe in, feel that experience inside your chest. As you exhale, feel the energy move through your torso and through your shoulders. As you breathe in, the energy gets warmer inside your chest or wherever you had originally felt it. And as you exhale, you push it down the length of your thighs, out to your elbows. As you breathe in and breathe out, you're pushing it through every cell in the body. So from your head to your toes, every aspect of who you are feels this experience. All 80 billion cells in your body, billions of cells in your brain. There isn't a spot inside of you that doesn't experience that sense of warmth. Now stay in that position and just breathe through it a couple times so you feel it. I mean, you feel absolutely everywhere inside of you. Now stay in that place, right? Well grounded, right? Feeling content, feeling warm from head to toe. Now in that position, can you imagine the person that we were just talking about previously, the person that caused that frustration? And if you stay in, but stay in that position and try to imagine them on the horizon. But you are who you are. You're in that place of strength, of warmth, and you see them on the horizon. And in that place, could you actually think about a different way to view them, a different way to look at their actions, knowing that people only do things for their own needs. People never do anything in a truly harmful way to other people consciously. People were always trying to meet their own needs first. And if you stay in this beautiful, warm place and you view the circumstances of your past that you had brought forward previously, can you see it differently? Is the energy around it a little bit different? Does that have the same kind of meaning as it had when you first brought it back? Is the feeling around it the same? Is the imagery around it the same? No, probably not. And what would you do then if you could give yourself advice at the time when that experience had transpired? What would you offer that experience? If you're standing on the sidelines, like a coach to your former self, what would you tell them? What advice would you offer from this really centered place? How could they have shown up differently in the experience? Because at the end of it, we only control our own experiences. So how could you have shown up differently to make that whole pattern, that whole process turn out a little bit differently, less oppressive to you? All right. Do me a favor, come back here with me for a moment. Now I just want to take a deep breath and just let it settle. Now bring back that experience again, just from this place. Go back and just pull that experience back, that from this person from 10 years ago, or from last week, or from 20 years ago. Pull that experience back again. And for a lot of you, when you first had thought about it, it was right here. Is it my face, right? When you recall the second time around, can you recall it exactly the same way? Does your memory of that individual and what happened, does it show up exactly the same way when I first asked you to remember it? It's not the same at all, right? Why not? Any idea? It's your memory. I mean, like I'm not Houdini. I mean, I'm not tapped into your brain, right? I didn't whack you with a stick and give you amnesia, right? There was no big epiphany. There was no, 14 hours of psychotherapy, dragging this thing up, beating it to death on the floor. What changed? What do you think? What changed was the foundational premise on which you made that decision. You stabilize the memory, right? You decided what foundational emotional context, what foundational philosophy you're going to use, what lens you're going to look at to actually look at that memory. You decided, rather than having your brain subscribe it for you. Incoming information, attach it to my reaction points. Incoming information, attach it to something else. Incoming information, attach it over here, right? I said something, you heard what I said, your brain took it in through your ears, going, I heard what he said, that reminds me of something somebody else said, so that must be what it means. Doesn't mean that at all. It's very confusing, actually. When you really sit down and look at the human experience, it's really quite a bizarre thing that we live in. And I think, and again, if you look at our history, how much simpler it was when we had a culture. Inside that culture, we had a religion. Inside that culture and that religion, we had a traditional way of eating. Inside that culture and that religion, that traditional way of eating, we lived in a certain area for thousands of years. Inside that consistency, continuity, I'm not saying that you have to subscribe to anything and that life should be so fixated, but there was a point in time for the greater part of history where things were fixed and we had a pattern of doing things. I think one of the challenges that we have now, I think, is that beyond our own misconceptions, beyond our own insecurities, beyond our own craziness, is there a place that we can meet beyond that, right? So it's when you look at, all right, see you, Robin. So beyond our own insanity, what is the guideline you're going to use? What are you going to measure your thought processes against? What are you going to measure your judgments against? What hierarchy of thought will you use to start making decisions? Or are you simply going to allow your history and all the inconsistencies and the randomness of our decision-making processes over time to make decisions? Because life is coming at us pretty quick in this day and age, and we're making very snap decisions, but we're making snap decisions that seem randomness hijacks reality. I like that. We're making decisions kind of off the cuff. So if we make a decision on career and we decide that, well, I need to generate an extra $40,000 this year, we got to get out of some debt load. The kids want braces. Apparently they want to go to university. I don't know what the deal that is. Why don't they just go travel the world like every other bum? So our life demands certain things of it. So we decide that we're going to work harder inside of our career, make a one-dimensional decision. But also family is really important to us. And our relationships are important to us, and our health is important to us. But we're only thinking in a money context, right, about generating more money to look after our family. So we move away from family wellness and all these things that are important to us to generate revenue. And then we leave all the other stuff on the table, right? Isn't that what happens? And then we have something called empty nest syndrome when you get two people doing that, right? Generating all that to look after the family, this family unit, at the expense of their spirituality, their relationships, their wellness, right? The sense of contribution, because we live in one dimension of our life. And then, of course, when the kids move away, all of a sudden there's a couple strangers going, we don't know what's going on anymore. We're missing an important buffer inside of our life. So routinely, what I've looked at in a kind of simplified way is looking at everything that I've read, which I enjoy reading and I won't stop, but I have a context in which I go into my material with. That I have a thought process that I kind of meditate on before I pick up a book and start reading it. I'm not looking necessarily for new and fascinating information. I think, if I never read another book again, I think I'd be okay. How about you? If you never bought another book, would you be fine? Would you be okay? Well, it's one thing about loving to read. I mean, the enjoyment of reading. But if you didn't have any more access to the information other than the one stuff you already have, would you be okay? And most of us would be fine. The challenge is learning how to act and coalesce and collect all this information so that no matter what book you buy, you're buying it kind of on the same premise. You're not looking for something that you don't have. You're looking to strengthen and empower what you already know to be true. So having a core philosophy, having a core identity, looking at these things that you stated, this thing about integrity and honesty and empathy, right? And these character strengths that you profess this to be true, and you see evidence of it from time to time, but are you able to keep that, to create an anchor, a SAM type kind of anchor, so when you're making decisions, you're making decisions based off those attributes, based off what you believe to be true about you. So you start mitigating the randomness of decision making, start controlling what the brain is allowed to do on your behalf. So become more mindful of the things that are happening. And if we know what the experience of empathy and contribution and integrity, and we know what those feelings are like, and we experience them, see sharp, we know what those feelings are like, we take the time to experience them on a daily basis before our feet hit the ground in the morning, before we make big decisions on our life, and we bring those feelings up again and again and again, SAM, the whole idea of stability, and then we start our day off that foundational premise. If we're feeling freaked out, fearful, angry, pissed off, whatever the case may be, before we make a decision on what that means, we put it off to the side. And again, we go through the whole stabilizing component. We stabilize our emotional status. And then we, from that viewpoint, from that posture, we start making decisions. And what we'll find is that it's over time, over the course of this conversation, is that if we take the time to stabilize our thought process, stabilize how we feel, decide on the emotional context, or Tony Robbins calls it state, decide in advance and practice in advance the recalling of the preferred physical or emotional state I want to be in. And we practice that as decisions come up, as decisions have to be made, sometimes challenging ones. We're not going to start running into conflict because we have conflicting ideologies inside of our mind. I'm not asking the 24-year-old for their opinion anymore. Neither I'm asking the 10-year-old or the 26-year-old or the 31-year-old. And we diminish the randomness on how we think. And again, if you look at old cultures, they generally don't have that issue because no matter what's going on within their lives, they have a place beyond their own thought process to actually measure it against. So if your religious identity is Presbyterian, beyond your humanness, you can meet at your Presbyterian faith and make decisions based on that. If you're a Buddhist and beyond your own humanness and the chaotic human mind, you have a Buddhist set of philosophies you can engage to and buffer against that. Whether it be Christian, whether it be Hindu, whatever it is you subscribe to, however you want that to show up, we have to decide on who we're going to be and what we stand for. And it doesn't have to be a religious identity. It just has to be a philosophical set point, a set of values and emotional states that we prefer. And if we choose that in advance, if we practice that in advance, then we'll find building a life that's really congruent, that's actually not schizophrenic, that we feel we're in this beautiful sense of flow, and all our decisions, the decisions I make in my finances is actually supporting my health. The decisions on my health are actually supporting my family. Decisions on my family are supporting my career. Decisions on my career are supporting my sense of contribution. It's just the whole idea of being in harmony rather than trying to be in balance. Because everybody's looking to have a balanced lifestyle, and the way when I look at balance, I find balance to be a very divisive statement. Balance, right? A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Went to the gym on Sunday. Drank 2 bottles of wine on Monday. See, balance, right? Went for a run on Tuesday. Ate chocolate cake on Thursday. See, balance. That's schizophrenia. Not balance. So when you look at a lifestyle that's in harmony, people ask me or look at my lifestyle and say, you're very one single-minded. I said, no, my life is so kind of in flow with itself. It's the whole idea is to have harmony. Well, what I read, what I eat, how I think, who I associate with, what I listen to, the environment I choose to live in, the career I've chosen, the relationship with my kids, all those things, I try to set it up to a constant that I can rely on, like a strong physical core, right? I have a strong psychological core. And I really try to make sure that shows up. Now, I'm a human like everyone else, so not a perfect equation. I'm just telling you right up front, your brain's going to fight you for it for a little bit. But when I'm losing my shit and I'm having some really challenging times, I push it all aside and I go meditate on what I believe to be true about the path of my life, what I believe to be true about me. If I take the time and just focus on that over and over again, bring those experiences back, then when I go back and look at the problem, what I thought was a problem is no longer nearly as relevant. Right? Because again, if our struggles are simply going to flick the switches of every experience that is similar to what you're currently experiencing, and you'll flick it on 15, 20 different switches from a melody of different experiences in your life, and you're going to feel that all in one fell swoop. And the anxiety and the fear, the frustration, and the sense of helplessness, and all these things show up at the same time as a big bag of chemical soup. And all they are is neuropeptides being dropped from your brain saying, what do you think of this? How do you feel? How does that feel? We're going to pump a bunch of chemicals into your system. What do you think? And if the feeling is not consistent with how I choose to live my life, then I can dismiss it. I can look at it, observe it, but I don't have to buy into it because that's not my preferred reality because I chose one. I chose how I want to feel. And I know consistently if I'm fearful, I'm kind of panicking a little bit, or I'm more, let's say, maybe morose or upset or depressed, I know all I'm doing is accessing my history. Every time I feel kind of depressed, kind of morose, all I'm doing is I'm just flipping through the Rolodex of my past. If I'm anxiety-ridden, I'm fantasizing about something that hasn't even happened yet. But if I'm feeling good, and my life is okay, when does that happen? Right now. So the whole goal is when you're exercising through this whole factor 3 experience, what do I ask you to do? Fire your core, fire your core, fire your core. Practice, don't train, practice. Don't train, practice. I want you to practice. I want you to practice stabilizing. I want you to practice thinking. I want you to practice paying attention. Why do you want to continue getting half-ass results with exercise when we can actually get 10 times the benefit by think, feel, and do? Same nervous system, same brain. Why not make it as simple as that? Why not try to avoid all the convoluted conversations around personal development, what we should be doing, and just push all that to the side and say, all we want to do is SAM. We want to find a stabilizing thought, a stabilizing set of emotions that you can agree on, that you'll use on a daily basis, that you'll bring up. Without the story, without the conversation, every time you get into a big sentence structure about this, you're actually, somebody from your past is elaborating a really interesting story about what happened and how it showed up and why this is that. We don't want any stories. All you have to do for this week coming up is you have to, practice before your feet hit the ground in the morning, is practice pulling forth the emotional states that we're looking for. How do you want to feel? What do you believe? What do you profess to be true about you as a human being? How do you want people to view you as a human being? What are you trying to impart to your children? Right? What is that feeling state? What are those attributes? And again, pick approximately 3 of them and live into them on a daily basis. And you'll have to remind yourself, because will you be petty? Absolutely. All right. Will you be short-tempered? Perfectly. Probably more than once a day. Will you be judgmental? Yes, absolutely. It's a necessity. You're a human. You're going to be judging the shit out of everything, right? But the funny thing is that don't be upset at your pettiness, at your judgments. right? Don't be upset at anyone. Just be kind of fascinated by, wow, you know, within a span of 1 hour, I judged 85 people. That was just, it's like a world record, right? Going to the mall, when you're shopping for clothes, right? Judging yourself. But be mindful enough to witness it, but don't judge the whole process. Just be fascinated by how random that machine is running, just out of control. And more importantly, as you go through this process, what you don't want to do is go to the people in your world and try to tell them this stuff, because it's going to be completely out of context with what their experience of the world. And they'll just think you're nuts, and they'll just want to shut you down. So the worst thing you can do is go try to teach this conversation to somebody else. It's not for them. It has nothing to do with anybody, and you'll just piss a whole bunch of people off. Seriously, right? People, and this is what happens when people go, oh, just so what a great idea. I want to go back. I'm going to hammer everybody with this. You know, it's like the world, when the word authenticity came into vogue. Everybody, oh, you're out of, you're not being authentic. What the hell? You went to a 2-hour course, and now you're a 20-year span philosopher. No, it just, so this is for your own enjoyment. This is your tool. And it's just, when you find experiences with in relationships, with children, with friends, with family, and you feel those things coming up, when you started feeling bad, don't ask, why am I feeling this way? Ask who. Not why, but who. Because obviously you should be a highly evolved human being at this point, right? You're a very spiritually evolved human being, right? So if I'm feeling badly, if I'm feeling frustrated or judgmental, I'm fascinated by, where did that reference come from? You know, where in my history did that judgment start occurring? Because if I believe in myself to be a certain person, to live into a certain set of standards, and yet I'm being a bit of an ass in this part of my brain, I'm kind of curious, where did that start? So again, part of the act of being mindful is observing your own insanity and not living into it. Letting that stuff run and just look at it, go, oh my God, again, it happened again. Like it's only like 9:30 in the morning. And I'm like freaking crazy. I can't believe how much wild stuff goes inside of my head. But that's the cool thing, because you get to observe your own insanity, and you get to stay in a nice, safe place of these character strengths and these values, and just watch it go by. And you'll start recognizing patterns in how you think, patterns in judgment, patterns in the levels of frustration, and you'll start seeing where it actually comes from. And you'll start noticing these patterns of behavior, and there probably won't be a whole lot of different ones. Yes, Melinda, you are schizophrenic. You'll start noticing these patterns of behavior because we had the ability to be mindful. Remember, if we can observe our thoughts, we are not them. If you can observe the thoughts in your mind, you can observe your own behavior, your own emotions, and your own randomness, then you are not that. So that's really kind of the cool process. So this week, your practice is looking at being able to draw those attributes and character strengths forward of who you believe and profess yourself to be. Again, you're on a daily basis, you're bringing forth those experiences of what happened in the positive experience that happened, where you feel in your body. You want to carry that with you. And if you have something we call a kinesthetic anchor. So when I was in Nicaragua, I did a yoga teachers training program. And at the end of the program, they gave everybody these little kind of Malabi bracelets. So to me, this is an anchor. It's a kinesthetic anchor, meaning that when I wear this, it reminds me of the philosophy that we're being taught and the experience we went through while we're doing our yoga teacher training in Nicaragua. So when I think about it, it actually brings that whole thought process forward. So when you're thinking about embodying your experiences, embodying these attributes, have a necklace, have a ring or a bracelet, something that you wear on a daily basis. And when you're thinking about them, you can actually roll this in your hand and think about the experiences and connect the touch and the feel and the texture of something with the experiences in your mind and your body. So all I need to do is actually grab something, grab the anchor, right? Grab this thing I've attached to this experience, and it brings me there very quickly. The same way a smell can remind you of Christmas. Same way a sound of somebody's voice can remind you of either a good thing or a bad thing. A certain color will remind you, right? So that's kind of done arbitrarily. We want you to do this consciously, right? So create a conscious anchor that's attached to the valid aspects of who you are, these great character strengths or attributes, and you want to be able to access that on a daily basis before your feet hit the ground, before you take off out in the morning. And then when you find yourself being challenged, your job is not to actually confront the challenges that are coming in at you. Your job is to hold them at bay for a moment, stabilize yourself, and then come back and meet the challenge head on. So before you knee-jerk react to anything, your job is to just take a breath, stabilize, then move forward, right? It's the same thing we do in exercise. Right? If you feel your knee bothering you in exercise, you don't just keep hammering your way through it, hoping the knee will get better. You stop, you reset, you stabilize, and then you try again. And so I'm going to ask you to do the same thing through the course of this week and go through, look at the experiences, look at how many times that you actually had to do that throughout a day. It's actually quite funny how frequently it'll happen in the beginning, or how much you have to consciously think about it. And what we want is get it to a point where it simply becomes a natural part of who you are. And all the decisions that you'll be making over time. So we talk about wellness, right, which is very relevant to our program here. We talk about spirituality. We talk about relationships and family. That you'll be able to base all those and build them on this new foundational premise. And there's discoveries that will be there. There's epiphanies that will show up that had never even entered your mind until you start coalescing all this stuff together. It's actually quite fascinating. Because you can't do much in a compartmentalized brain that doesn't speak to each other. The wellness conversation is not talking to the spirituality conversation, who's not having anything to do with family, who's completely devoid and not talking to the career part. Financial conversation is just way out here, freaking out in left field, right? And they're not communicating. And there's nothing to actually coalesce them together. So if we can start doing that, you'll be quite surprised at the degree of intelligence, the degree of answers that you'll find, and how less complicated life truly is. Now, it might mean that there's some big decisions to make along the way. And invariably, some parts of life, you'll come to a point where you built a whole identity around one aspect of your life, and you realize the foundation behind it was actually completely flawed. So any change that can and will happen over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks, it's all about the behavior that you can change within yourself. It has nothing to do with you leveraging somebody else to make them change so they fit your model of the world. So the rules are, you can't use it as leverage against anybody else ever, right? It's not fair, not a fair way to play. You can't do harm to another person, either thought, word, or deed. Right? It's not about what they did, and retribution has nothing to do with revenge, has nothing to do with somebody else being wrong and you being justified in proving a point, right? Can't have anything to do with that. It's simply something that happens inside your own head, inside your own version of reality, and you get to start recreating it. You actually start getting to recreate it, and know that in the beginning, of course, your brain will fight tooth and nail to live on to your old standards. Just be aware that that's going to be the case, and it might be a drag out, knuckle bleeding kind of fight kind of battle, because you have a psychology that's been well designed over time to create the world that you now live in. And one thing that the brain loves to do is keep things just like they are, for your own protection, apparently. So again, be mindful enough, and I'll end this up here really quick here, guys. I know we're quite over time here, but be mindful enough to be aware that when you're feeling unsettled, you know that you're no longer stable, and your job is simply to stabilize. That's all you have to do. Don't make it complicated. Simply stabilize it. Pick the emotional state that you want to, and simply stabilize it. That's it. All right. So that's your marching orders. What I will ask you guys to do, of course, when you go through the week, give us your experiences, right? Give us some feedback. Let us know exactly what's going on now. And if you're really being challenged, If your brain is really beating the living hell out of you, then send me a message, let me know, and I'll walk you through it. Most of you guys will get through it okay, but if your brain is really beating the shit out of you and it's raising a whole bunch of craziness, just take the time, send me a note, and we'll arrange a call to sit down and walk you through the process. All right. But again, it's going to be a really interesting process for everyone. Ideally, it's going to be very powerful. It's going to be very simplistic. It's quite earth-shattering how much, we're working with people with PTSD and being able to remap their brain from people having brains being splattered on their garments. I think if we can walk people through that process, we can get through most of our stuff here with a little bit of ease and a lot more grace, I'm sure. Right? So just get a powerful tool at your hands. It's a matter of learning how to use it. So I will